Hello, I'm Dr. Monty Hayes. Welcome to today's lesson about analyzing argument. As you know, your course reader asks you to compare two different arguments about the same issue, voicing opposing main points or theses. So in just a moment, I'm going to share with you on your screen two opposing arguments. I'll do a talk through, a think aloud. I'll ask you to follow along, notice things, and activate your prior learning in the course. Put on your thinking caps, think about context, audience, purpose, and strategies. Use the vocabulary you've been developing in our course as we look critically at these two published editorials or opinion pieces. I'm going to find our editorials at a wonderful site, a wonderful resource called Opposing Viewpoints that's available to you through the Kirkwood Library. So click on Library, look, here is Opposing Viewpoints. And this can be a resource that you might want to visit simply because you're concerned or interested in contemporary issues, or in case you are looking to conduct research for a college paper. So you'll see various topics: business and economics, health and medicine, national debate topic. This is an organized program of debate involving college and university students. I decided to take a look at water pollution. It's something that interests me because I enjoy the outdoors. I live in an agricultural state, and it's something, frankly, about which I don't know a lot. So let's take a look. And as we see, when we click on any of the topics that interest us, we'll see featured viewpoints, more viewpoints, academic journal articles. You might have a professor who requires you to use this type of peer-reviewed sources, radio programs, other news, and some statistics. So since our lesson deals with analyzing arguments, I decided to look at viewpoints. And we'll take the first one. Fracking is safe. All right. And something that's nice about opposing viewpoints in context, we get information about the author of any piece. So Rock Zierman is the Chief Executive Officer of the California Independent Petroleum Association. In the following viewpoint, he asserts that numerous studies have concluded that fracking is a safe technology that poses no threat to air or water quality, remember that's our focus, and does not cause earthquakes. Despite these studies and the support for fracking by agencies such as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Energy, and the Groundwater Protection Council, anti-fracking activists make exaggerated claims of problems associated with the process, Zierman maintains. So Zierman maintains. This is his argument as characterized by the writers at Opposing Viewpoints. He says that regulation of fracking is necessary and that there should be an ongoing effort to ensure that the public is well informed, but that banning fracking makes no economic or environmental sense. So this is something I would urge you to read. It's helpful to you. Again, Opposing Viewpoints offers that as a way of developing some mental Velcro, some context for your critical reading. And here are some questions, conclusions of a study that Zierman cites, what evidence he uses to dismiss counterarguments, in regard to water supply, water pollution, and earthquakes. All right, and then we'll see there are lots of links here, so a person could look to see what the links are. And notice that we get hydraulic fracturing. Fracking is short for that. Hydraulic fracturing has been routinely used for more than 60 years to produce oil and natural gas, but is it safe? The question has been asked and answered many times over by government regulators, scientists, and other technical experts, and they have all concluded that hydraulic fracturing is a fundamentally safe technology. Hydraulic fracturing is a fundamentally safe technology. This is the author's claim. We'll see whether he is able to illustrate that support in a way we find satisfactory. Interior secretaries, energy secretaries, and environmental protection agency heads have repeatedly said that fracking can be done and is being done so that it doesn't present environmental or public health problems. So there is a way to mitigate the risk. That means there is risk, but it can be handled in a way that keeps us and our drinking water safe. That's been the case for decades, said President Barack Obama's Interior Secretary Sally Jewell last May. Things in brackets have been added by the editors of this website for readers they think might or might not be familiar with certain elements of a piece. This is the author, in parentheses, abbreviating, so we won't have to spell it all out as the piece continues. Jewell's predecessor, Ken Salazar, testified to Congress that hydraulic fracturing, quote, has been done safely hundreds of thousands of times, and warned lawmakers against anti-fracking, quote, hysteria. Look to see how the author characterizes the opposition as the piece continues. So we can scroll down to the title and the argument. Often with editorials published on a website or in a newspaper, there are titles and subtitles that express the author's thesis or main point. Remember what you've learned about structure of argument, thesis, reasons, and evidence. Look for them here. I think we've identified one. As far back as 1995, the EPA studied whether hydraulic fracturing contaminated drinking water. The EPA studied a site in Alabama at the request of environmentalists and found no evidence of any contamination or endangerment of underground sources of drinking water. In 2004, the agency conducted a broader study and also found fracking poses little or no threat to water supplies. So the author begins with citing some research, some reports from more than 20 years ago and from just over 10 years ago. He cites them. We've talked about audience, EPA. Do you know what that stands for? The author assumes that readers will. In 2009, another study from the U.S. Department of Energy and the Groundwater Protection Council, an interstate body of environmental regulators, concluding that fracking is a safe and effective technology for producing energy from deep geological formations. So again, he is citing research reports going on. And something that you might note, look how short these paragraphs are. You might get into some trouble if you were to submit papers with paragraphs that short. But in online genres, readers look for a lot of white space, some rest for their eyes between pieces, and in newspapers generally. So the short paragraphs are a convention of the genre. More recently, Stanford University geophysicist Mark Zoback, who's also served as an advisor to the Obama administration, confirmed fluids used in hydraulic fracturing, quote, have not contaminated any water supply. And with more than a mile of impermeable rock separating deep shale and shallow drinking water aquifers, it is very unlikely they could. In California, it is worth noting, more than 90% of hydraulic fracturing occurs in parts of Kern County where there is no potable or drinkable groundwater. So again, we get more citations. They're not very in-depth. We get the exact language, we get the quotes, but we get perhaps snippets or overviews. Now another subpoint in the form of a title. Anti-oil and gas activists exaggerate concerns. So again, if we've looked at elements of argument and you've thought about refutation as well as concession, we can see through this subtitle that the author is going to move on to refutation, to refuting counter-arguments, the arguments of those who fear that fracking will damage the environment. Anti-domestic oil and gas forces respond to such good news by finding new ways to scare the public. Okay, take a moment and think about the language there. That's rhetorical. That's strategic. They are anti. They are Killjoys, responding to good news from the Obama administration that fracking might not be dangerous or harmful. And what are they doing? They are finding new ways to scare the public. So, boom, 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 negative characterization of one's opponents. We'll see whether that bears out. That's why you, dear reader, hear more and more allegations about air quality and water use. On air quality, they are ignoring that California's oil and gas industry has operated under some of the world's tightest emission controls, which have cut fugitive emissions even while drilling activity has risen. One might want to follow the link to look for statistics and see whether indeed this is so. It probably gives the author ethos that he invites us to do that. Next, activists exaggerate problems associated with water usage and produced water disposal associated with hydraulic fracturing. In states where hydraulic fracturing is used much more frequently and where many times as much water is used as in California, the process accounts for less than 1% of total water demand, according to the Department of Energy and the Groundwater Protection Council. Something I would like you to look at, students, in this lesson in Talon would be the two links provided to sites dealing with logical fallacies. Study those. See whether you note them in these pieces, if you review the video, in any of the other editorials that you might see in Talon, or in anything you might read. Is this perhaps a false analogy? I'm not sure we have enough information to conclude, but it's something critical readers want to be on the lookout for. In addition, wastewater can be treated and reused, minimizing both issues. In California, we use much less water than other states because of our geology. So again, we get a little bit of context and audience. For perspective, the amount of water used in all of the hydraulic fracturing jobs in California last year was about the same as the amount of water the state's golf courses consumed in half a day. Do we know how much they consumed? I frequently read something about the expansion of golf courses and fear that it might deplete resources and be harmful to wildlife. Oops. So that might or might not be a false analogy, and he might be assuming that readers think that golf courses, well, how many golf courses can there be? How much water can they consume? Perhaps a lot. As for earthquakes, a year-long study released in 2012, the first of its kind in the state, at the Inglewood oil field in the Baldwin Hills area, found no detectable effects on vibration and no water or air quality problems either from hydraulic fracturing. Perhaps that's because, as Zobak has explained, the amount of seismic energy released during hydraulic fracturing is about the same as, quote, a gallon of milk falling off the kitchen counter. We can see why the author quoted this. It's a very vivid line, and it's probably going to work to effect. Who hasn't seen a carton of milk falling off a counter? It's probably not going to seem like an alarming image to people, and it's also very concrete. In fact, the National Research Council concluded last year that hydraulic fracturing does not pose a high risk of inducing earthquakes. The separate process of injecting oil and gas-produced water into deep disposal wells has never triggered an earthquake in California, despite tens of thousands of active injection wells that have operated for decades. So he's citing some information, some history, a report, another report. He's got a vivid visual, and he's refuting counter arguments that perhaps earthquakes are an additional concern of fracking. Again, it's up to us as readers to decide whether he does so successfully. But it helps us if we know what he's doing, if we can analyze the structure and techniques of his argument, or anyone's, so that we can decide whether it works. Happily, there is a bipartisan political consensus in California to go along with the scientific consensus that responsible and regulated hydraulic fracturing is safe and is a great benefit to our state. Governor Brown, one of the nation's leading environmental advocates, was very clear that he and the regulators at the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources would let science be their guide rather than, as he put it, jumping on any ideological bandwagons. Here, looking at political context might be beneficial. Governor Brown is a Democratic governor, seen as left of center on the political spectrum, someone we might presume would be concerned about the environment. So, readers who might trust Governor Brown more than scientists, more than this author, more than anyone publishing on this site perhaps, might be swayed by his support of regulations that nonetheless permit fracking. Following the division's lead, the governor and the large majority of the heavily Democratic legislature opposed several fracking moratorium bills and instead passed SB 4, California's new comprehensive regulations on well stimulation. Under SB 4, the industry now operates under even more strict regulation than before, with a host of fracking-specific rules designed to make the process even more transparent and to address the concerns that many Californians have expressed in the wake of the activist misinformation campaign. Again, we're getting those accusations of scare tactics. Producers now have to pre-notify both regulators as well as surrounding residents and property owners before doing any hydraulic fracturing. They must post on a public website all chemicals used in the process, as well as amounts of water and disposal methods. They must obtain an approved groundwater monitoring program that ensures no fluids are escaping the wellbore. Some information about the existing regulations. Hydraulic fracturing has dramatically lowered greenhouse gas emissions in the United States because fracking is required for natural gas development in other areas of the country. President Obama, certainly a strong environmentalist, acknowledged this when he said, "We should strengthen our position as the top natural gas producer because in the medium term at least, it can not only provide safe, cheap power, but it can also help reduce our carbon emissions." Again, think audience, think whether citing President Obama might sway those who tend to be worried about hydraulic fracturing. But then we need to think as well about the site where this originally appeared, Natural Gas, a supplier's publication. The people who are responsible for this website make their living by natural gas. Regulators should continue to review the rules that apply for hydraulic fracturing and find ways to improve them to ensure that the public has the information it needs about the process. The facts clearly show that this technology can be used safely, as has been the case for the last 60 years. Again, something to allay public fears. There haven't been major incidents, as people might remember with nuclear plants in recent decades. So we get more thesis here to go with the subtitles. So again, make your own decision whether this is a strong argument, but understanding how the argument works, its context, audience, clearly its purpose, as stated in the thesis, and the strategies the author uses, rebuttal, citing of sources, citing of particular sources, perhaps a logical fallacy or two, operate in that. Now, fracking is not safe, interestingly enough, from the same place. All right, with a pulled quote, and the author here, Anthony Ingraffia, is the Dwight C. Baum Professor of Engineering at Cornell University. In the following viewpoint, he contends, so again, this is from the opposing viewpoints authors, that despite claims to the contrary by those in the gas and oil industry, we can see more refutation coming, can't we? Problems that arise during the fracking process can release toxins into the air and water. Most of the problems that occur can be traced to the difficulty of getting the cement job right, he explains. And Graffia suggests that to preserve water and air quality and reduce carbon emissions, America should turn to renewable wind, water, and solar energy technologies, not fracking. We'll see whether he's trading in the either-or fallacy. Here are some questions. Failure rates. What does the evidence show? Some of the factors that can lead to cement damage, because we might think, if we know what these factors are, how likely are they? And then leakage rates found by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration at gas and oil fields in California, Colorado, and Utah. So look at his evidence. All right. Many people have embraced hydraulic fracturing's new wave of oil and gas development in shale as a bridge to a clean energy future. He's problematizing it by putting it in the quotations. As a longtime oil and gas engineer who helped develop shale fracking techniques for the Energy Department, I know these technological advancements have not equated to making oil and gas development a cleaner extractive industry. So he's giving his background. He's saying he has the technical knowledge, and he says he's actually been a participant in this endeavor. Cement failures are common. Again, a subpoint pulled out in the form of a subtitle. Fracking is an extreme, note the language choice, an extreme force of fossil fuel development because of the large number of big wells that have to be drilled to develop these deep oil and gas resources. Unconventional oil and gas drilling requires directional drilling, high frac fluid volume, slick water, fracking fluid water that has been laced with a lubricant because, contrary to what you'd think, water isn't slippery or viscous enough to do the job. Little side explanation for readers. Multi-well pads and cluster drilling. But we can also see with such terminology, cluster drilling, he might be assuming an audience, particularly on this website, with some familiarity with natural gas production or extraction techniques. These technologies put drinking water, I'm going to keep the cursor from there, at risk for contamination with biocides, heavy metals, salts, radioactive materials, endocrine disruptors, and oils. And think about how this sentence would be different if he just put the period there and ended it there, rather than adding that list. While operators repeatedly claim that their technology is safe, so again he's looking at the counter-argument, those of us who understand the industry, that's rhetorical language, can tell you that problems frequently occur. It is often said within the industry that the three biggest problems are cement, cement, and cement. It is difficult to do a perfect cement job. So the author is cautioning that while people might say this is how the process works, it doesn't always work the way it is intended to work when technicians get into the field. The BP oil well failure in the Gulf of Mexico, this was added for readers who might not be familiar with that catastrophic event, was the result of a shoddy cementing job. The cement has to bond to a grease-coated steel pipe on one side and with the rocks, minerals, and mud on the other side. The problem is if the outside layer of cement fails, the inside layer doesn't matter. According to a review of the industry's own data, 60% of oil and gas wells failed within 28 years. These failures can lead to the contamination of the aquifers we need to keep clean for drinking water. So he explains things. A review of the industry's own data. What data? Review conducted by whom? When? Might want to know that. Multiple industry studies show that about 5% of all gas and oil wells, or vice versa, leak immediately because of integrity issues, with increasing rates of leakage over time. With hundreds of thousands of new wells expected, this problem is neither negligible nor preventable with current technology. So he's anticipating a counter-argument to his refutation of the contention that fracking is safe. And he's explaining things, perhaps giving, well, obviously trying to give an insider's view to those of us who don't work in this industry. Pressures under the earth, temperature changes, ground movement from the drilling of nearby wells. This gets at one of the questions in the opposing viewpoints introduction. And shrinkage. Crack and damage the thin layer of brittle cement that is supposed to seal the wells. And remember, getting the cement perfect as the drilling goes horizontally into shale or other tight formations is extremely challenging. Once the cement is damaged, repairing it thousands of feet underground is expensive and often unsuccessful. The oil and gas industry has been trying to solve this problem for decades. And with no solution, he's implying that perhaps a solution will be difficult to identify. Think about structure of argument, elements of argument. Think about where we see reasons and where we see evidence. Are there places, if you were writing this, you might support some of the reasons with evidence, with studies, with hyperlinks? Fracking risks contaminating air and water. The point he's trying to make, expressed in a title. The scientific community has been waiting for better data from the EPA to assess the extent of the water contamination problem. That is why it is so discouraging that in the face of industry complaints, the EPA reportedly has closed or backed away from several investigations into the problem. Perhaps a full EPA study of hydraulic fracturing in drinking water due in 2014 will be more forthcoming. Well, now I want to go do some research and reading about that. In addition, drafts of an Energy Department study suggest that there are huge problems finding enough water for fracturing future wells. Water quality impacts may be even more severe than water quality impacts. So look at his characterization of an oversight agency and contrast that to the characterization in the previous opinion piece. And risks aren't just to water resources. Another problem is that methane routinely leaks from these unconventional wells. Though there is significant uncertainty over the rate, recent measurements by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration at gas and oil fields in California, Colorado, and Utah found leakage rates of 2.3% to 17% of annual production in the range my colleagues at Cornell and I predicted some years ago. So experts have seen this coming. We predicted this. You might want to listen to me when I talk about cement. And you might notice that this is very measured. It might even seem dry to you as I read through this. But think about his tone, his thoroughness, and how that might come across as contrasted with something more fiery. Might there be some advantage to taking this approach? This is the gas that is released into the atmosphere unburned as part of the hydraulic fracturing process, and also from pipelines, compressors, and processing units. Those findings raise questions about what is happening elsewhere. The Environmental Protection Agency has issued new rules to reduce these emissions, but the rules don't take effect until 2015 and apply only to new gas wells. We have renewable wind, water, solar, and energy efficiency technology options now. We can scale these quickly and affordably, creating economic growth, jobs, and a truly clean energy future. And look how this author, like the previous one, builds up to his thesis. Often in your writing, you put the thesis in the first paragraph. We see that it gets it becomes a culminating feature of these pieces, although the headlines help us along the way and signpost exactly where we'll be going. Political will is the missing ingredient. Protection of our water and air, as well as meaningful carbon reduction, is impossible so long as the fossil fuel industry is allowed so much influence over our energy policies and regulatory agencies. Policymakers need to listen to the voices of independent scientists while there is still time. Independent scientists such as myself, and again as critical readers, we can decide whether or not he begs the question in any of the assertions he introduces at the very end of his argument. And a person might advance a thesis that is defensible without defending it. So again, we need to be critical readers and analyze both the what and the how of the messages we read. I hope you will check out Opposing Viewpoints in the future, and I hope that you will enjoy noting the elements of argument in the opinion pieces you read.